Nia Carter was a girl whose life was measured in miles and microtips. Her only goal was to build a sanctuary for her neighborhood's youth without selling her conscience to the streets. But on a biting, wind-whipped night, she found a card holder, a slim sliver of burgundy leather packed with enough cold, hard currency to buy the lease of her dreams. The owner was Choi Hyun-woo, a man whose quiet influence moved the very tectonic plates of the city's underworld. What Nia didn't know as she gripped the handlebars of her shivering scooter was that she hadn't just found a lost item, she had intercepted a deliberate, high-stakes bait. Returning that wallet was an act of ironclad integrity, but it was also the first irreversible step into a world ruled by a calculating architect who only invests in those he can never truly own. They say everyone has a price, but they never tell you what happens when you refuse to sell. For me, life was a cycle of freezing rain, $3 tips, and a dream that felt a million miles away. I was a ghost in an orange backpack, until the night I found a wallet belonging to the architect. Choi Hyun-woo is a man with ink on his chest and the city's secrets in his pockets. I thought returning his money was just a good deed. I didn't realize it was a high-stakes test. He didn't want my honesty, he wanted my invisibility. He offered me a throne for my community, but the keys came with a technological leash. Stay with me until the end, because the choice I make when the world is watching is a transformation you have to see to believe. Before we enter the architect's shadow, do me a favor, like and subscribe to join the community. It helps us keep these stories alive. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. Nia Carter was a flicker of orange in a concrete gray world. At 21, she balanced the bulky, thermal-insulated weight of a delivery backpack with the precarious ledgers of her community center's business plan. She was sharp, alert, and understood the value of $1, usually the kind scavenged from the bottom of her bag after a 12-hour shift in the rain. Her natural hair, pulled into a disciplined high puff, stood as a crown against the city's soot, and her large, expressive eyes remained bright with a hope that the city's weary cynicism hadn't yet managed to dull. She was driven by an uncompromising vision, a safe door for the local youth, a place where the cycle of poverty could be broken, and a life where she didn't have to choose between a warm meal and her monthly rent. That dream was her North Star, but the path to it was a grueling, uphill climb through freezing wind and the relentless indifference of the gig economy. The wind didn't just blow in the city's industrial corridor, it hunted. It found the gaps in Nia's muted gray-blue windbreaker and bit into her skin with the precision of a razor. At 2:45 a.m., the world was reduced to the vibrating handlebars of her electric scooter and the rhythmic, hollow slap of her tires against the wet pavement. Each mile was a tally of physical endurance, a slow erosion of the heat she had stored during her brief, 10-minute break at the warehouse. On her back, the bulky orange and black delivery backpack felt like a leaden weight, its thermal lining doing nothing to warm her own shivering frame. She pulled to a stop at a red light that seemed to last an eternity, the silence of the empty street amplified by the distant, rhythmic hum of a transformer. Nia exhaled, her breath blooming into a thick white cloud that momentarily obscured the view. She wiped a subtle sheen of moisture from her forehead, a mix of freezing mist and the cold sweat of exertion. Her eyes, wide and alert despite the hour, drifted toward the corner of 4th and Main. There it was. The old community center. In the harsh, flickering orange of a street lamp, the "For Lease" sign taped to the cracked glass felt like a personal taunt. To anyone else, it was a derelict shell of brick and dust, but to Nia, it was the only thing that mattered. It was her North Star, the physical manifestation of a promise she had made to the kids who currently had nowhere to go but the corners. She knew every inch of that building's history, and she knew exactly how much the security deposit cost, a figure that felt as unreachable as the stars above the city's smog. The night's earnings had been dismal. A string of $3 tips and a "thank you" that didn't pay for the electricity to charge her scooter. She felt the heavy, familiar ache in her calves, a throbbing reminder that her body was a finite resource she was spending far too quickly. Just as she prepared to kick the scooter back into motion, her hand brushed against the pocket of her hoodie. The weight was different. Substantial. She pulled over to the curb and reached inside, her fingers closing around the rich, glossy texture of burgundy leather. It was the card holder she had found earlier near the high-rise entrance, a sleek piece of craftsmanship that felt warm and disturbingly expensive against her frozen palm. She opened it just a fraction, the light of the street lamp catching the crisp, sequential edges of $100 bills. It was more than a deposit, it was the lease, the renovations, and the future. For a heartbeat, the wind stopped hunting. The silence of the city felt like a bated breath, waiting for her to choose between the girl she was and the life she desperately needed. Nia sat on the edge of a damp concrete planter, the heavy orange backpack still pulling at her shoulders like a physical manifestation of her poverty. The burgundy card holder felt like a hot coal in her lap. With trembling fingers, she fanned the contents fully, counting under her breath. 60 bills. $6,000. In the dim, sickly light of the industrial district, the money didn't look green, it looked like light. It looked like the end of the 3 a.m. shifts, the end of the "for lease" signs, and the beginning of a life where she could finally breathe without the weight of the city crushing her chest. $6,000 was a ghost's fortune. To a man who lived in a glass tower, it was a rounding error, a tip for a weekend's indulgence. To Nia, it was the key to the heavy iron gates of the community center. She could see it so clearly, the fresh paint on the walls, the sound of basketballs hitting the court, the safety she could provide for kids whose faces mirrored her own. Her thumb traced the edge of the leather, her mind already moving through the logistics of an anonymous cash deposit. No one would know. The man who dropped it hadn't even looked at her. To him, she was just a blur of orange and windbreaker, an invisible cog in the city's delivery engine. But then, the phantom scent of peppermint and laundry starch drifted through her memory, the smell of her mother's kitchen. She could almost hear the low, steady vibration of her mother's voice, a woman who had worked 3 jobs and never once came home with a penny that didn't belong to her. Nia, the memory whispered, a life built on someone else's loss is a house built on sand. You carry your name higher than you carry your needs. The internal battle was a silent, violent storm. Her stomach cramped with the hunger of a long shift, a sharp reminder of why she was out here in the freezing dark. Every muscle in her body screamed for the shortcut. But as she looked at the ID tucked behind the cash, the sharp, angular face of Choi Hyun-woo, a different kind of chill settled over her. This wasn't just money, it was a tether. Taking it would be easy, but she knew that easy was the most expensive thing a girl like her could ever buy. The dignity her mother had hammered into her was more than a moral code, it was her only shield. If she took the money, she became the very thing the city expected her to be, someone broken by desperation. Nia took a shuddering breath, the cold air burning her lungs. She closed the wallet with a definitive, muffled snap. She wouldn't be a thief, and she wouldn't be a victim. She stood up, her jaw set with a newfound, terrifying resolve. She didn't know who Choi Hyun-woo was, but she knew who Nia Carter was. She would return the wallet, not because she was afraid of the man, but because she was afraid of losing herself. The transition from the cracked pavement of the industrial district to the private enclave of the Heights felt like crossing into a different country. Here, the street lamps didn't flicker, they glowed with a soft, expensive warmth, illuminating manicured hedges that stood like silent sentinels against the night. Nia felt the sudden, crushing weight of her own presence. Her scooter's electric whine seemed loud and intrusive in the heavy silence, and her bright orange backpack felt like a neon sign screaming trespasser. The estate of Choi Hyun-woo was not just a house, it was a fortress of glass and charcoal stone, hidden behind a gate that looked like it had been forged in an ancient world. As Nia pulled up to the intercom, two men stepped out from a stone guardhouse. They were tall, motionless, and dressed in tailored black suits that made them look more like statues than human beings. Their eyes, sharp and cold, swept over her battered scooter, her oversized windbreaker, and the high puff of her hair with a clinical, dehumanizing efficiency. "Delivery?" one of them asked, his voice a flat, low bass that carried no warmth. Nia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt the moisture returning to her palms, a subtle sheen of nerves. She was a nobody from a world of microtips and cold grease, standing at the threshold of everybody's, who commanded the city from the shadows. She pulled the burgundy card holder from her pocket, holding it forward with both hands. It was an offering, a shield, and her only reason for being there. "No," Nia said, her voice small but remarkably steady. "I'm here to see Mr. Choi. I have something of his." The guards shared a look, a silent communication that excluded her entirely. One of them spoke into a hidden earpiece, his gaze never leaving Nia's face. She stood her ground, her shoulders slightly hunched, her feet planted. She didn't want trouble, she just wanted to finish this and return to a world where the air was easier to breathe. The massive iron gates began to retreat with a soundless, hydraulic grace. The driveway beyond was a winding path of polished white marble that seemed to glow under the moonlight. As she rolled forward, Nia felt the eyes of invisible security cameras tracking her every movement. She was entering a place where wealth wasn't just money, it was the power to disappear, to judge, and to test. She was a girl on a bike in a kingdom of kings, unaware that as she crossed the threshold, she was no longer just a delivery girl, but a variable in a calculated game she was only beginning to understand. The interior of the estate was a cathedral of silence and steel. Nia walked with soft, tentative steps, the squeak of her damp sneakers on the polished onyx floor sounding like a frantic heartbeat. She felt small, her bulky orange backpack casting a jagged shadow against the modern imperial grandeur. When the doors to the main study slid open, the air changed. It was no longer the biting cold of the street, but a dry, expensive heat that smelled of cedar and aged paper. Choi Hyun-woo was standing by a floor-to-ceiling glass wall, his back to her as he watched the distant, flickering lights of the city he helped architect. He was a study in controlled dominance. He wore a black tailored blazer open over a bare chest, revealing the sprawling black and gray ink of a dragon that seemed to coil around his ribs. A gold cross pendant hung from a heavy chain, catching the dim amber light as he finally turned. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and neutral assessment, his eyes narrowing just enough to let her know he was reading every tremor in her hands. Nia didn't wait for him to speak. She stepped forward, holding the burgundy card holder out with both hands, her grip careful and ceremonial. "You dropped this at the high rise," she said, her voice catching slightly before she steadied it. "I'm Nia Carter. I'm here to return it." Choi didn't take the wallet. Instead, he moved with a slow, effortless grace toward a low marble table where a stack of high-denomination bills sat beside a crystal decanter. He didn't look at the money, he looked at her. "There is $6,000 in that leather, Nia," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the floor beneath her feet. "You spent 12 hours tonight for less than 100. That money could buy your building. It could buy you a decade of sleep." He picked up the stack of bills from the table and fanned them out, not as a threat, but as an invitation. "Why are you here? Are you waiting for a reward, or are you simply too afraid to be rich?" The temptation was a physical weight, sharper than the cold outside. He wasn't yelling. He was offering her the easy path her mother had warned her about, framing her honesty as a weakness. Nia's large, expressive eyes met his steel-gray gaze. She felt the sheen of nerves on her forehead, but she didn't lower her hands. "I'm here because it isn't mine," she said, her jaw tightening. "I don't need a reward for being who I am. I just want to finish my job and go home." Choi remained motionless, his silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. He wasn't reacting, he was evaluating. He looked at the girl in the oversized windbreaker, seeing the resilience in her hunched shoulders and the guarded intelligence in her eyes. For the first time, a ghost of a shadow crossed his neutral expression, not a smile, but a cold, satisfied confirmation. The test wasn't about the money. It was about finding the one thing his world had run out of, a person who couldn't be bought. Choi Hyun-woo let the silence stretch until it felt like a physical barrier between them. He finally reached out, his long fingers brushing against Nia's as he took the card holder. He didn't check the cash. Instead, he tossed the leather onto the marble table as if it were a piece of discarded trash. The gesture was a shock to Nia's system. The $6,000 she had guarded like a holy relic was, to him, nothing more than a prop in a theater of his own making. "The wallet wasn't lost, Nia," he said, his voice dropping into a register that was chillingly calm. "I watched you pick it up through the high-rise security feed. I watched you hesitate. I watched you struggle. And then I watched you ride 6 miles through a freezing rain to a house that isn't on any public map to give it back." He stepped closer, his presence expanding to fill the room, the golden cross at his neck swaying slightly. He didn't tower over her with aggression, he surrounded her with the sheer weight of his attention. "In my world, everyone has a price. My associates, my enemies, even the men at the gate. Honesty is a rare luxury I usually can't afford. But your honesty isn't what I'm looking to buy tonight." Nia's eyebrows raised, her lips parting as she tried to find her voice. "Then why am I here?" "I want your invisibility," Choi stated, his eyes locking onto hers with a penetrating intensity. "You are the girl the city ignores. You are a shadow in a bright orange jacket. You move through police cordons, past high-security lobbies, and down back alleys without a second glance because you are just a delivery. People see the bag, not the person. I need a ghost, Nia. Someone clean. Someone who exists outside the structures I control. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a single, unmarked business card and a high-end, encrypted mobile device. He laid them next to the discarded wallet. The building on 4th and Main, the community center. It was purchased an hour ago by a private holding company. I am the owner. If you walk out of here and never call that number, the building will remain a shell. But if you take that phone, I will hand you the keys tomorrow. I will fund your youth center, your staff, and your future. In exchange, when that phone rings, you pick up a package. You deliver it. You ask no questions. You see nothing. Nia looked from the phone to the man who seemed to hold the strings of her destiny. The easy path had returned, but this time it was wrapped in the one thing she truly wanted. It was a devil's bargain, a contract written in the shadows. She felt the heavy responsibility of her dream pressing against the fear in her chest. Slowly, her hands, still steady despite the cold, reached out. Her fingers closed around the cold metal of the phone. I accept, Mr. Choi, she whispered. A ghost of a smile, cold and satisfied, touched his lips. Call me Hyun-woo, Nia. We are partners now. The weeks that followed were a surreal split screen of hope and shadows. By day, Nia stood in the hollowed-out lobby of the building on 4th and Main, the "For Lease" sign replaced by a heavy set of brass keys that felt like a miracle in her pocket. The air inside no longer smelled of neglect, it smelled of fresh sawdust and the citrus scent of floor wax. She walked the perimeter with architects and contractors, pointing to where the computer lab would sit and where the basketball court would be refinished. She was Nia Carter, the visionary director, a woman reclaiming her neighborhood one brick at a time. The funding was seamless, flowing from an untraceable account that cleared every hurdle with the silent force of a ghost. But when the sun dipped below the jagged skyline, the orange backpack came back on. The transformation was a ritual of necessity. She would zip up the gray-blue windbreaker, pull her hair into its tight, disciplined puff, and wait. The encrypted phone sat on her nightstand like a dormant predator until the unique, low-frequency hum vibrated through the room. No names. No locations. Only a set of coordinates that flashed for 10 seconds before dissolving into static. Nia became a phantom in the city's peripheral vision. She was the delivery girl who bypassed the long lines at the docks, the one for whom the heavy steel doors of private hangars slid open without a word. The packages were never large, a padded envelope, a small titanium briefcase, a sealed canister, but the weight they carried was measured in the tension that prickled her skin. She moved through police checkpoints with a practiced, weary smile, her thermal bag acting as a shield of normalcy. The officers saw a girl hustling for a tip, they didn't see the architect's ghost carrying the secrets that kept the city's underworld in balance. She worked out every night in the center's empty gym, her shadow stretching long against the new floorboards. Every drop of sweat was an attempt to wash away the creeping guilt of her patronage. She told herself the ends justified the means, that the laughter of the kids who would soon fill these halls was worth the silence she kept. Yet, every time she caught her reflection in a dark window, she saw the ghost looking back. She was no longer just a seeker of light, she was a vital artery in Hyunwoo's empire. The bond was deepening, the invisible leash tightening with every successful run, until the line between the director and the courier began to blur into a single, dangerous identity. The rain had returned, a cold, needle-like drizzle that turned the asphalt into a mirror of neon and grime. Nia moved through the meatpacking district, the electric hum of her scooter lost in the rhythmic thrum of industrial fans. The coordinate drop-off was a nondescript loading dock near the waterfront, a routine run that should have taken 20 minutes. In her thermal bag sat a heavy, vacuum-sealed ledger, one of the architect's physical backups that never touched a cloud server. She felt the shift in the air before she saw the threat. The district, usually a theater of late-night forklifts and shouting crews, was suddenly, unnervingly still. As she turned into the alleyway of the drop-off, a pair of headlights cut through the fog behind her. They didn't pass. They slowed, hovering at her rear tire like a predator tasting the wind. Nia's pulse spiked, a hot flash of adrenaline competing with the chill on her skin. She didn't look back, she followed the protocol of the invisible. She accelerated, her eyes darting to the side mirrors. A second car, a silver sedan with tinted windows, slid out from a side street, effectively flanking her. This wasn't a random mugging or a police patrol. This was a pincer movement. She swerved toward a narrow pedestrian shortcut, but the silver sedan surged forward, its tires screeching as it hopped the curb to block her path. A man stepped out, not in the tailored, imperial black of Hyunwoo's men, but in a rough, tactical jacket with a jagged red scar cutting across his brow. He didn't reach for a wallet. He reached for a weapon. The ghost, the man rasped, his voice barely audible over the rain. Drop the bag and you might get to keep the bike. Nia's large eyes widened, her breath hitching as she realized the terrifying truth. The invisibility Hyunwoo had promised was a lie. A rival faction, the Iron Circle, didn't just know about the architect's new courier, they had been mapping her routes, waiting for a moment when she was isolated from the syndicate's protection. She was no longer a shadow, she was a target. With a desperate twist of the throttle, Nia didn't stop. She veered into the gap between the car and the brick wall, the metal of her scooter scraping against the sedan with a shower of sparks. She ignored the shout of rage behind her and the sudden, sharp crack of a window shattering. She tucked her head low, her heart hammering against the ledger in her bag. The hunt was no longer a metaphor. She was a girl on a bike carrying a kingdom's secrets, and for the first time, the North Star of her youth center felt light years away, obscured by the spray of gravel and the roar of engines closing in. The city had transformed into a cage of blue and red strobes. Following the ambush, a citywide lockdown had been triggered, ostensibly a high-alert police sweep, but Nia knew better. It was a net designed to catch a ghost. Every major artery was choked with barricades, and the air hummed with the predatory thrum of a low-flying surveillance chopper. Inside her jacket, the encrypted drive felt like a shard of ice against her ribs. Hyunwoo's last message had been a raw, jagged command: deliver the drive to the cathedral by 4:15 a.m., or the streets will burn. Nia didn't use the main roads. She became a creature of the red line, the narrow, forgotten veins of the city where the pavement gave way to gravel and rusted iron. She pushed her scooter to its absolute limit, the motor whining in a high, tortured pitch as she tore through narrow alleyways and over pedestrian bridges. Behind her, the headlights of the Iron Circle's scouts appeared and vanished like vengeful spirits, unable to match her frantic agility in the tightest corners. She reached the edge of the downtown district, only to find the bridge blocked by a wall of police cruisers. Her breath came in ragged, burning hitches. The temptation to stop, to surrender, and to let the world of empires collapse under its own weight was a deafening roar in her ears. But then she thought of the center. She thought of the kids who were sleeping just blocks away, unaware that a war was being negotiated over their heads. Her hyper-responsibility, once a flaw, hardened into a blade. She didn't break. She veered toward a construction ramp, the orange backpack shifting violently as she launched the scooter over a gap in the unfinished walkway. For a second, she was airborne, a flicker of orange suspended against the cold, indifferent stars. The landing was a bone-jarring shock that nearly sent her over the handlebars, but she gripped the rubber with a white-knuckled intensity and kept moving. She arrived at the cathedral's rear entrance at 4:14 a.m., her skin gray with exhaustion and slick with the frozen mist of the river. Hyun-woo was there, standing in the shadows of the Gothic arches, his face a mask of pale, lethal tension. He didn't move as she skidded to a halt, the scooter finally dying in a hiss of steam. Nia reached into her jacket and pulled out the drive, her hand shaking so violently she had to use both to offer it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, not with the coldness of a patron, but with a sharp, electric recognition of what she had endured. The war was averted, the silence was bought. Nia leaned against her battered bike, her lungs raw, realizing that she had navigated the red line only to find herself deeper in the architect's shadow than ever before. 6 months later, the morning air in front of the building on 4th and Main carried the scent of hope and fresh asphalt. The "For Lease" sign was a distant memory, replaced by a vibrant mural of a rising sun and the words "The Carter Center" in bold, unapologetic gold. Nia stood on the steps, her deep espresso skin glowing under the soft morning light. She wasn't wearing the muted gray-blue windbreaker or the heavy thermal backpack. Today, she wore a tailored cream blazer, her natural hair styled in a magnificent, voluminous halo that caught every ray of the sun. As she gripped the oversized ceremonial scissors, her hands were steady, the tension that had defined her delivery shifts had settled into a quiet, regal poise. The crowd was a sea of faces from the neighborhood, mothers who could finally breathe, and kids whose expressive eyes mirrored the wonder Nia had once felt alone. She looked down at the red ribbon, a vibrant line between her past and her future. With a single, decisive snap, the ribbon fell. The cheers that followed were a deafening roar of liberation, a sound that should have been the final note of her struggle. But as the crowd surged forward to tour the new gym and the pristine computer labs, Nia's gaze drifted toward the curb. Parked 50 yards away, a massive black GMC Yukon Denali sat idling silently, its tinted windows an impenetrable void. She didn't need to see through the glass to know that Choi Hyun-woo was inside. She could feel his presence like a gravitational pull, a steady and controlled intensity watching his most successful investment. He was the shadow that made the light possible, the architect who had built her throne out of secrets and late-night red-line runs. Nia retreated into her new office, the door clicking shut against the jubilant noise. On her mahogany desk sat a singular object that looked out of place against the neat stacks of community flyers, the encrypted black flip phone. It sat there, cold and heavy, a technological leash that linked her sanctuary to the underworld. She realized then that she wore 2 crowns. One belonged to the neighborhood savior, the woman who had brought light to a forgotten corner. The other was the invisible crown of the architect's ghost, a title that made her the most protected woman in the city, and the most trapped. She was no longer the girl who just wanted to do the right thing. She was the woman who had done the necessary thing. Nia sat in her chair, looking out at the kids playing on the court she had bought with a Mafia boss's wallet. She was safe, she was funded, and she was theirs. When the phone on the desk finally vibrated with that unique, low-frequency hum, Nia didn't hesitate. She picked it up, her face neutral, her soul intact but forever changed, ready to move once more into the shadows that protected her dream. The core message of Nia Carter's journey in this story is that integrity is both a shield and a lure. Nia's refusal to steal isn't just a moral victory, it is the very trait that makes her a valuable asset to a man who lives in a world of betrayal. The story explores the golden cage of success. Nia achieves her noble goal of saving her community, but she learns that in the real world, clean dreams are often funded by dirty hands. Her transformation proves that power doesn't always come from a weapon. Sometimes, it comes from being the only person in the room who can be trusted, even if that trust becomes a beautiful, gilded prison. Nia traded her total independence for a sanctuary that will save hundreds of lives. Some call it a sacrifice, others call it a sellout. But when you're standing in the freezing rain with a $6,000 choice in your hand, the line between right and necessary gets very thin. Was Nia right to take the architect's phone to save her community center? Or did she lose her soul to save her neighborhood? Type Team NIA if you'd make the deal, or Team Freedom if you'd walk away. If you enjoyed Nia's transformation from a delivery girl to a Queen of the Shadows, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more high-stakes stories coming your way that you won't want to miss. We're building a global community of storytellers here. Drop your country's flag in the comments so we can see how far Nia's story has traveled.